progressive message is something that the Progressive Caucus does every week to project a progressive vision for America. Not a reactionary vision, not a status quo vision, but a vision of America as we believe that it could be, can be, that all men and women are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights, among them life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Progressive Caucus and the Progressive Message tonight here to come to bring a message to the people about where we're going, where we've been. And tonight's topic is why I am a progressive. Why I'm a progressive. Here's why. We're going to talk about it tonight. It's going to be good. When it comes to this issue of marriage equality, I always say to people that it's not mandatory. It's up to the individual. What about individual liberty? I just want to ask the two members with me today, the gentleman from Colorado, the gentlelady from Maine, to just review with me, if you would, some of these things that I believe were progressive in nature. The American Revolution, I think, was progressive. Yes, America was a slaveholding country. Yes, women didn't have equal rights. Yes, there were a lot of problems. But if you look at that day and in that time, for the American colonists to say, we're not going to be ruled by a king anymore, and we're going to choose our leaders, that was a progressive step forward. It may not be a progressive. We may look at this time and say, well, there are problems. People didn't overcome a lot of social injustices. But if we look at it for what it was, individual citizens saying, I don't want a king to make up my mind for me. I want to cast a vote and select my own leaders. That, I believe, was a progressive step forward. The Bill of Rights, I think, was progressive. Think about the first one. No government religious institution. Everybody practices their own religion as they choose, right? The Establishment Clause, right to freedom of the press, right to assembly, right to redress grievances. Progressive step forward, and all the other ones as well. Universal white male suffrage. Of course, not all Americans got the right to vote at the same time, but there was a time when being a white male was not good enough to get you a ballot. You had to have some property. You could not be Catholic. You had to be a white male Protestant property owner. So when America said, you know, the property thing and the religious thing, those don't apply anymore, of course we would have liked more people to get the franchise, but many people got it. Public education, emancipation of the slaves, national park system, food safety, breakup of monopolies, antitrust legislation, progressive. Homestead Act, land-grant universities, so that all Americans could really enjoy university education. What about this one? I'd like to ask the gentlelady from Maine, what about rural electrification? I think that it's a progressive value because it says, look, we know Americans who live in rural America like living there. These are the folks who value listening to the birds chirp and the grow of the crops, the food that we eat, and they enjoy that life. But if there's no economy out there, then it's difficult to live out there. You see young people moving into the city, not necessarily because they want to, but because they feel they have to. This rural electrification in one generation, broadband access in another, represents our shared commitment to each other to live our lives as we would choose. Moving down our list, women's suffrage, 1920. It's important for Americans to know that women cannot always vote in America. It was progressive women, Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and others who stood up and fought for it. It was Sojourner Truth, and also a man by the name of Frederick Douglass standing up, fighting for women's right to vote, progressive step forward. And it was women in the West who made the claim that, hey, we're already voting. You may not have a constitutional right to do it, but we do it in our state, and they helped lead the way. But what about abolition of child labor? The 8-hour workday, pretty progressive. We all hope that we can do that. Minimum wage, Social Security, the civil rights for minorities and women, voting rights for a minority and the poor, cleaning up our air, water, toxic dump sites, consumer product safety, and Medicare. Well, I just want to say, yes, we have a great progressive history, but as the gentlelady from Maine just pointed out, we have a tall order to do. We got to get health care to all Americans. We have to make sure that we have a green, renewable future so that we can live in harmony with the planet. The planet's going to keep on turning. Whether we can continue to survive on it is a whole nother question. But I'm happy that in the 110th and 111th Congress, we were able to pass legislation like the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, which was an important step forward for people to bring pay equity lawsuits so that when they were victims of gender discrimination on the job. We were able to pass the Children's Health Insurance Program, not health care for all, but health care for children, very important bill. We were able to pass the Local Law Enforcement Hate Crimes Prevention Act, which is a law that says that, look, you can have your value system as to how you feel about different sets of Americans, but you better not harm them. They're within the protection of the law. They have a right. People like Matthew Shepard will not be harmed, will not be beat. The rest of us will not tolerate it, and that is how we express our values for all human beings. And of course, as you just pointed out, the gentlelady from Maine, Congresswoman Pingree, the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, the so-called Stimulus Act, which gave a tax cut to 95% of middle-class Americans. Now, progressives aren't against tax cuts. We're just against tax cuts for only the rich people. We believe that working people ought to get a break sometimes, too. And so these kind of things are things that we're fighting on. Now, this may be the history, but we have a tall agenda for the future that we want all Americans to partake of. And I just want to say very briefly that to be a progressive is to be one who believes in how we have our individual rights, but we also have things that we proudly share together, like our safety, like our clean water, like our environmental legal regime. But but on the other side, what a progressive is not, is somebody who basically operates on the basis of fear-based politics. Progressives are courageous and boldly say, we can do this new thing. We can do this thing together. We're not afraid to embrace the future. But there is a set of politics that says, be afraid, be very afraid. The Russians are going to get you. These people are going to get you. Somebody's going to get you, and you got to be afraid. You can't share with anybody. You just got to look out for yourself. That is a set of political ideas that are prevalent around here, too. And those ideas are not the ones that made America great. The ones that made America great are these ideas listed on this board and the ones that we're talking about now. We're talking about the progressive message. When we've had members, including Congresswoman Woolsey, Congressman Polos, Congresswoman Pingree from Maine, talk about why I'm a progressive, given personal testimony and given their own ideas and views and values about this critical subject. But we've also want folks to be able to check in on the website right here, cpc.grijalva.house.gov. Very important for people who are watching to check in and check out the Progressive Caucus agenda. Very important. The Progressive Caucus is a moral force within the Congress, bringing Americans to its better half. And I quite agree with Congresswoman Pingree, who pointed out that all these things are on this list are things where people said, look, let's embrace our common life, our shared life. But these are all things, and I think that Congresswoman Pingree would agree with me, that before they were passed, people said it can't be done. Before they were passed, people said, you know what, this is something that we shouldn't do. But you know what? All these things were done, and we're all, as Americans, much better off for it. And let me also wrap up by saying that it was the words of President Barack Obama who said in his first address to Congress, I reject the view that says our problems will simply take care of themselves, that government has no role in laying the foundation of our common prosperity. That rejected view, I submit, is a conservative view, because government does have an important role to play in our common prosperity, and our problems will not simply take care of themselves. President Obama went on to say, for history tells a different story. History reminds us that at every moment of economic upheaval and transformation, this nation has responded with bold action and big ideas. I quite agree with the President on this point, and I yield back the balance of my time.